So, here we are, no trade in Last Epoch. What we do get I will shortly go over at the end of the video, but it's kind of irrelevant because the developers are basically forcing everyone to play their online multiplayer game in solo self-found mode for reasons that are honestly beyond me. I will get into those reasons very soon, it is the meat of the video, and I'll tell you why the devs are wrong as well, in my opinion. But first, let me clarify my own stance and my own biases, so you know where I'm coming from. I have been playing Last Epoch for 1500 hours. I enjoy the game, suffice to say, and anyone playing the game up until this point is playing the game in solo self-found, as the game is as of this moment completely offline, meaning multiplayer isn't there yet and neither is trade. When I say solo self-found, I just mean that you as a solo person, so on one account, are responsible for all the farming yourself. The items are shareable between any characters that you create, so it's not like solo as in Last Epoch, but it is solo self-found as in Path of Exile. That means that everything I farmed in Last Epoch, I farmed myself. Those numbers though, the playing numbers, a little inflated, because I make build guides and a lot of content and I usually just have the game running when I'm doing that. I would say that Last Epoch is currently good for around 200 hours of playtime, and then endgame becomes still and repetitive. I also have 4000 hours in Path of Exile, which is important because it is the main comparison here, the RPG that actually does have trade. I'm only playing since a few years, so that is significant, 4000 hours in a few years. And also, I'm not really making content about this game, barring a few random videos, so all of these hours are purely because I'm enjoying the game, not because I want to produce videos. For a content creator, that's actually quite a significant difference. Most of the time, I play solo self-found in PoE, and only occasionally I play trade leagues. When I do, though, I tend to go pretty hard on the currency farming strategies, and I am one of those guys that sets a goal, which is usually a headhunter, and then achieves that goal a month and 250 hours later. That is me in a nutshell. That means that for me personally, this whole Last Epoch announcement doesn't matter all too much. I was planning to play SSF anyway in Last Epoch. But this video isn't about me, it's about the future of the game. A future that requires players. A future that is jeopardized. It's not for me, I will play, I'll be fine. It is for all those people that were led to believe the game had trade, rightfully so. The people that are also known, by the way, as the vast majority of the ARPG player base. And if you don't believe that, check out the league launch tonight in Path of Exile. See the numbers over there, see why it's so popular. It's all about those people that could potentially play Last Epoch, but now they won't, because the devs forced them to play SSF, and I can't begin to describe how bad of a decision this is. No, I'm just kidding, I can describe it. I did, actually. This is a 6-page script, here we go. My video will start with a point of view from the devs, which is clearly outlined in their post, and then I'll break down that point if I feel they're wrong. Which, spoiler alert, I feel a lot in this case. But not always, they do have legitimate points. I'm going to wrap up the video with a conclusion which talks more about the consequences of this decision for the game as a whole and how this will be detrimental to its growth. First, let's see the design philosophy here of the devs. One of the core ideas here is that the devs want to ensure that killing monsters and playing the game is the primary way of acquiring items, and that means that automatically trading isn't the primary way. One of the reasons that they're providing for this argument is that it feels more rewarding to drop an item that you can use instead of trading for it. I dare to differ, honestly. Because in a trade economy, dropping a valuable item you cannot use but you can trade for currency, which you can then use to buy a new item, also feels rewarding. This was even true back in the days when in World of Warcraft you found an epic from random trash monsters that was bind on equip. It is true in Path of Exile when you find a squire or inspired learning, and it will be true in Last Epoch if you would have found an Orion's Eye. Second thing, the post goes into why previous iterations didn't work, but that honestly doesn't matter much. It's water under the bridge, as they say. I never really got that expression, honestly. Water under the bridge, but I think it's the correct use of it. Point is, for reasons explained down the line, they wanted to avoid a full trade economy. As a matter of fact, trade is simply non-existent now. It's just entirely gone. And by the way, if you enjoy content like this, opinion pieces on ARPGs, that's kind of what I do, so consider subscribing. I appreciate it. Second paragraph, the devs are talking about item acquisition. They acknowledge that these days, players tend out to plan their builds, and those builds might require build-enabling uniques, and it would be super handy to be able to trade for those uniques. that's true. Then the devs continue by saying that trade isn't the only way or even necessarily the best way to support it. That is not true. It clearly is the best way. I'll get into why. But let's keep reading. The flip side of being able to acquire any item through trade is that the process of acquiring the items you need for your build is just the process of farming currency. So the activities you do and the places you farm are whatever is most optimal to farm currency. This runs a big risk of turning a potentially varied endgame experience into a very repetitive one, where only a small part of the content is experienced over and over again. By the way, if anybody is still in doubt whether this is about Path of Exile or not, that is the only game that would mention currency. So this is a direct reference to Path of Exile. In this paragraph, it becomes clear to me that whoever is making the decisions over here is putting way too much emphasis on the negatives of trade and is oblivious to how trade truly works and how it positively impacts a game. I have 4 points I want to highlight, starting with the main negative, the currency farming. It's a fair point that PoE Trade League is to a large extent a game about currency, and I must admit I'm not a huge fan of that either, so I tend to play solo self-found. However, what is not true is that as a result of that currency farming, all players are doing the same content or repetitive content. It's worth noting that, first of all, any endgame system in Path of Exile has so much innate variety that calling that out as being repetitive, and they're clearly talking about PoE here of course, is simply not true. Not only is this comment a little ironic, coming from Last Epoch, which doesn't have much endgame systems to begin with, and the ones that they do have are extremely stale and repetitive. I mean, have they ever played an arena run themselves? It also misses the fact that a game like Path of Exile actually provides plenty of ways of making currency. And because there's open trade, if everyone would indeed be doing the same content as Trasoki thinks, then automatically, by having an online market, the value of those items farmed in that content would go down. Because contrary maybe to what he thinks, you typically don't farm raw currency, loot goblins excluded. You typically farm content that provides certain tradable items like breach stones, influenced maps, specific boss drops, or anything really, it can be anything, which you trade for currency. And then you use this currency to buy new gear. That is the flow. And that's the flow for any game pretty much, right? I mean, bind on equip items in World of Warcraft that you sell, it's the exact same thing. You're not farming gold directly over there, no, you're farming items that you sell, or materials or whatever, shit for crafting, that sort of stuff. If Trasoki would be correct here, that everyone is doing the same endgame content, then those tradable items would decrease in value so much because the market gets overflooded, and they become worthless, which means another endgame system is likely to be more profitable, because the items that endgame system provides are not available on the market and are thus rising in price. It is a basic supply and demand market system. And the beauty of it is that it evens out. It makes plenty of endgame systems viable to farm. Variety is increased due to a market, not limited. So Trasoki is completely wrong, and if you look at Path of Exile you would know he's wrong. The first week of the league, lots of content creators are making currency farming strategies, and guess what? Are all of those content creators that are much more knowledgeable and much more experienced than me all saying the same thing? Go farm Delve this league, it is the best? No, ladies and gentlemen. As a matter of fact, you see a huge variety of currency farming strategies using a plethora of available endgame systems, and all of them are viable. This whole idea that an open economy leads to a single endgame meta is just completely false, and PoE proves it every single league. It is the player's choice to farm specific endgame content, which isn't in fact repetitive, it's just something they enjoy doing, whether it's Endless Heist, Delve, or blasting legions in maps. Yes, they pick one of those and they keep repeating that endgame content, but is that the definition of repetitive? Seems a bit far-fetched to me. And once again, look at the endgame systems that Last Epoch provides. Talking about repetitive, this is probably the most stale and repetitive endgame system of any modern ARPG out there. It is true that the emphasis of trade is on farming currency rather than farming items directly for your build, and I don't really like that either. But the arguments they give for this commentary are not correct and indicate to me that they don't actually have a good understanding of how trade works in a game like PoE. Which is understandable, by the way, if you see which PoE content creators are typically talking to the LE devs, which are Zizaran and Steelmage, two people that play almost exclusively hardcore solo self-found. Just a coincidence? Not sure, but if you would have consulted Grimro, Crouching Tuna, Baylor Mage, Mathil, Cute Dog, Big Ducks, MB Extreme or basically any other PoE content creator not playing solo self-found, which is the majority, the vast majority, they would not be in favor of this. Hell, I can't even imagine honestly Zizran being in favor of this. I mean, he knows how bad of a decision this is, surely. And keep in mind, around 90% of PoE content creators play trade because they want to be able to swap builds on the fly. They know how to farm currency, they want to try out new strategies, new builds, make content around that, show people cool new stuff. They can't go around playing solo self-found and hope they get the drops they need. Without trade, they are severely handicapped. It would take way too much time and it's too reliant on RNG and it's simply a losing proposition from a time investment perspective. They will not be able to put out enough content because they can't trade the items. This is of course true for regular players too, but I'm specifically mentioning content creators here because that is the new marketing after all. So, is that a problem? Well, by deciding the game won't have trade, the devs have basically excluded 90% of PoE content creators from their own game, which is a massive source of influx of new players. Every time Last Epoch gained a ton of new players is when PoE content creators are streaming the game. While the standard Last Epoch streamers are maybe hitting the 100 viewer count on a good day, no disrespect there by the way, the PoE ones are easily topping that tenfold if not 30-40 times. They are a big source of exposure, don't underestimate that. And people like what they see, because Last Epoch is a great game. But without trade, all of these PoE streamers aren't going to play Last Epoch for prolonged periods of time because they just can't be bothered to play SSF, which is completely understandable. With this decision, the Last Epoch devs single-handedly and by their own accord have moved Last Epoch into the niche categories of ARPGs, and it will never become the next great ARPG like they once envisioned in the Kickstarter. By the way, small side note, but trade and an online economy was actually in the list of Kickstarter features 4 years ago. Somewhere down the line though, it went away, with devastating consequences. Second point, and no one is talking about this, build variety. It's not just about not being able to play a specific build, but build variety as a whole. Because Path of Exile has trade and because it has all these varied endgame systems, there's actually a decent amount of build variety generally speaking. Sure, there's a meta, there's always a meta, but the existence of trade alone enables plenty of builds and makes them accessible to huge numbers of players. And what I'm missing here from Last Epoch are a few things. First of all, forcing everyone to play SSF means that your average Joe player is all of a sudden super limited in which builds he can play. Quite a few players simply don't have the time to play the game for hundreds of hours to farm for those uniques. And even common uniques can take 200 hours to drop. I still don't have a few after playing 1500 hours, which are listed as only uncommon or rare on the wiki. It is RNG after all. When opting into solo self-found in Path of Exile, you know this. You are aware the game isn't balanced around it. You know what you're getting into, and you are purposely accepting that limiting, but in my opinion very fun mode of play. But in Last Epoch, you're being forced. Of course the game will be balanced around it, but I think over time the number of viable builds will be rather small due to trade not being a thing. Because you have to keep the cycles in mind, right? The leagues. Every so often, maybe every quarter, there will be a full reset and a new cycle, and assuming you want to play and participate in that, you're being set back to zero. No items at all, it's a fresh start. It's fun if you have build options, but without trade, those are severely limited. And what I predict ends up happening is that we get a few builds from Foe or Lizard or some others that are monolith speed farming builds, because that, in the current game at least, is where the interesting uniques are. And everyone will play those builds that don't rely on any uniques or only super common ones, because that is the only feasible way to farm the extra uniques that you need for your actual builds. Instead of turning Last Epoch into a currency farming game, which they're so afraid of, which isn't ideal but it has many advantages too, they are turning Last Epoch into a unique farming game where it's all about running as many monolith bosses as possible, because that is where the most build defining uniques drop. And very few builds will be able to effectively boss rush. Especially if you take into account you can't put uniques in that boss rushing build because you can't reliably get them. Target farming is still RNG, ladies and gentlemen, don't let that ID fool you. So builds that don't use any uniques will be heavily favored, limiting variety significantly. You know how in PoE you have solo self-found friendly builds which are builds without uniques in most cases? Well, picture that as the meta for the entire Last Epoch game the first couple of weeks of a new cycle. You're welcome. Even with other endgame systems ultimately present in the game, the argument persists. Build variety without trade is severely hampered and will turn into a meta of its own with way less viable builds, way less variety, and ultimately way less fun. And think about this too. In SSF, you're going to hit that wall eventually that just stops your progression. You can't play the game any further because that unique you need that will push you over the edge just won't drop, and there's not a damn thing you can do about it because of the absence of trade. It's horrible. Third point, chase items. Chase items are something that I feel are super important in large-scale ARPGs, but chase items, the name kind of implicates this, are items that you should be able to chase, right? I'll admit this is a bit of semantics. I understand not everyone may agree here, but in my mind this makes sense. But how in Eterra's name are you going to have chase items in a solo self-found game? It is impossible, right? Especially if they claim this will be a balanced solo self-found game. You can make them super low drop rate, but then almost no one will ever get one, no matter how much you play. So then it's not really a chase item anymore because you can't reliably chase it. It's just a lucky drop at this point. Or you make the drop rates manageable or balanced, but then all of a sudden it's not a chase item anymore because now it's something that you are likely to get. Still not guaranteed, but a headhunter with a 2% drop rate from a boss isn't really considered a chase item. It's way too powerful to be that common. Way too many people would have it. The only thing in my mind that can reliably create chase items is if you make uniques extremely powerful and super rare, but tradable, because then they can be chased. Yeah, by doing the dreaded currency farming. Ooh, it's so bad. But now you have actual chase items. And by the way, a lot of people are acting like currency farming is such a bad thing or boring or not rewarding, but there are plenty of people that find a lot of joy in just steadily making money, progressing towards those chase items, and the long grind has a massive payoff when you finally buy that 8th doctor card, turn all of them in and receive your headhunter. It is extremely satisfying, it takes you hundreds of hours, and something I considered a proud achievement every time I played in Trade League. That whole aspect of trading is completely overlooked, I feel. We're acting like farming currency is inherently bad, but it really isn't. It's just a different mechanic to achieving a goal. And if the base game is just fun to play, has decent endgame variety and some randomization, farming currency is probably favorable compared to other farming techniques, like farming uniques, especially because not having trade is so detrimental to an online game. Fourth point, a bit more of a philosophical one, but indulge me if you will. There's so much emphasis on the negative aspects here, like balancing, item flippers, acquiring gear through trade, all those arguments that the devs and those in favor of this change in the community are using. You'd almost think that Path of Exile consists of 40% item flippers on the market. That's not true at all, right? Like, sure, there's people who's doing it, but hey, is this really such a big issue that you're going to remove trade entirely from your game? Holy moly. I strongly feel that these negatives are overstated. Consider this. I think very few people like how trading is implemented in Path of Exile. Even Chris Wilson himself admits it's not great. Basically, no one likes to trade. And there are other disadvantages, right? Like the item flippers and that kind of thing. Yes, you can play the market and make your money that way and that way create your builds. Sure, you can do it. However, that is not a reason to scrap something from the game. You have to look past that. An analogy I used in my previous video is paying taxes. Nobody likes paying taxes. It takes away your hard-earned cash. It's a tedious process to file your taxes. It's just bad overall. But it doesn't mean you just stop asking the citizens to pay taxes. The country would instantly collapse. While no one wants to pay taxes, most people at least implicitly understand that if you pay taxes, you get a highway or shopping mall or places assigned to build new houses or public events or museums or concerts or art or protection at protests, police, public transport or other things that make life enjoyable, safe or convenient. Trading is exactly the same. No one likes doing it, and yes, it has some undesirable outcomes, but not having it is far worse than having to deal with the negatives. This whole idea that playing the economy is the key to success is kind of far-fetched, honestly. I think Path of Exile has actually found a very decent way around this by making so many things tradable, that all of a sudden you're not playing the economy anymore, you're simply playing the game. And because pretty much everything is tradable and pretty much everything is profitable, you can play the game however you want and you can make money however you want. The option of solo self-found still exists for you, but it's not forced on you. The devs are acting like a game without trade but with cycles, which is important because of all those resets, doesn't suffer from these issues that they mentioned that a trade economy provides. That it doesn't have a stale meta. That it doesn't prevent players from farming single endgame content. But that's not true at all. It is likely the opposite because of a lack of build variety. It's just moving the goalpost but not actually solving the issues they're so inherently against. As a matter of fact, I think in many ways it's going to make the game and the meta much worse than in a trade game. So what do we get? Because we do get something. The only thing we will get is item gifting. This is already the biggest ARPG meme of 2023. Item gifting. I can't read these sentences, guys. It's so ridiculous. Alright. Item gifting only works in a group and only if you completed the content in the zone where, that loot dropped. So you're in a party together, you're in a zone, something drops and then you can gift it to somebody in your party. It's absolutely and utterly and completely inconsequential because it forces party play. It's not helping anyone or anything. It is just so ridiculous, honestly. And then think about strangers, right? Item gifting might not even happen because let's say the stranger drops a unique they know is rare and they can't use it for their build and you can. I feel there's a decent chance that they're not going to gift you that unique because they know it's rare. They might want it for one of their own future characters later, so they're just going to keep it because it might never drop again for them. And there's no other way to get this item now, is there? Because, there's no trade. Only friends will sort of guaranteed gift you items if they're in a party with you, which is a big hurdle. But random strangers? Not sure. Let's put an end to this and draw a conclusion. I'm probably going to get a bit of flack for this one. That dislike ratio will be an interesting one, that's for sure. There are clearly two camps, lovers and haters, and then there's the prophet, also known as Heavy. He is a camp on his own. I'm on the hating side, there's nothing wrong with that. What is undeniable though, and really if anyone argues against this you should get yourself checked, is that by making this decision the devs have turned Last Epoch from the next great ARPG into a niche ARPG that forces SSF on you. And solo self-found is just not a game mode that is appealing to most ARPG players, even if it's balanced. Even the lovers in the comments section realize this, acknowledge this, and they're fine with Last Epoch hitting similar numbers as Grim Dawn, or they're fine with it taking a niche place in the ARPG landscape, because that is what basically Last Epoch has turned into, like Grim Dawn. The lovers may be fine with that, but I don't think the devs are fine with that. It's a sad and a bad decision. And honestly, I think they'll come around. I really do. I think the devs have put too much of their blood, sweat and tears into this game to just keep going in this direction, because this is killing all the hype and so many potential players that wanted to play this game are now simply not going to. No matter if you like the SSF system or not. Remember, I do. But it's irrelevant, because what has happened for sure is that they have shut off a huge number of players with this decision. Way more than they would have done if they did implement trade. Yes, there are two camps, lovers and haters, but they're not of equal size. Just look at the distribution of SSF League versus Trade League. It isn't even close. I think this realization will kick in at the devs at some point. The devs will actually see the consequences of this decision, and I feel that in time we will get trade one way or another. Probably not a full open economy like in Path of Exile, but at least something less restrictive than this. This is hampering the game so much, and I can't imagine that is what the devs want. I can't imagine that they ultimately set out to create Last Epoch like 7 years ago by now or something. That niche solo self-found ARPG with that cool skill system. That can't be the vision here. Give it some time. I don't have too much hope, honestly, that it's going to be there anytime soon, but I am expecting many more videos like this one from way more influential people, and the hammer is going to fall. Give it some time, because I feel at some point the reality is actually going to kick in. They see the error of their ways, they see that this isn't leading anywhere, and then I'm really curious what happens and if we still get a trade in some capacity. I think we will. Hell, I can even see Tencent playing a positive role here, as they're owning like 20% of the company, telling them like, hey guys, we signed up for a seasonal game with a massive player base so we can take a portion of the MTX that you're going to sell. But now that you turn your game basically into Grim Dawn, we don't see that happen, so can you please enable trade? Pretty please? Thanks. Kind regards from China. I'm not even joking. That could happen. And I hope it does. And that's it as well. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, throw it a like. If you didn't, throw it a like. Just throw it a like. If you're a lover, I still love you. I enjoy SSF too. I see where you're coming from. I already mentioned that, but I'm thinking about the greater good here, not just about myself, realizing I'm outnumbered by the trade enjoyers. And we need the players, ladies and gentlemen, because EHG needs the money to, you know, support the ongoing development of Last Epoch. Something we would all benefit from. Thanks for watching. See you soon. Love you all, also the lovers, and even you, Profit Heavy. Bye bye.